All right, today we have Kaitlin Curtice. Kaitlin, I am such a big fan of yours. I've had you on the podcast like what? This is like the third-ish time I would
Yeah, I think
say
so.
now. It's been a few times, but it's been a while. It's been like a couple years since I last
Yeah.
chatted with you when we chatted about Native. But you've got a brand new book out, and I'm so excited to chat more
Ew.
about it. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But Kaitlin, you are an author, and you do so many wonderful things. You're part of the Potawatomi tribe, and I am just so excited to chat more with you. But who is Kaitlin Curtice to Kaitlin Curtice, besides being one of my favorite Enneagram 4s?
Thank you for that. This is such a great question because I was actually just talking to my partner Travis about this. The difference between Kaitlin Curtice and Caitlin B. Curtice, like the difference
Oh,
between everyday me and
mm-hmm.
author me, that we're all the same. we're all
Right.
we're all who I am. But there is like when I travel to do speaking events or when there's a performative nature of who I have to be sometimes, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
also just who I am. And so sometimes those feel at war with each other, but they're all still me. So it's a very interesting thing that I've been thinking about, when you are an author who kind of puts your heart on paper and sends it out to the
Mm.
world for everyone to read. But at the core of who I am, I would say that I am, a, a childlike, impatient, sensitive, easily excited human. And I have this kind of tagline I think I use in the book of how I feel that I am, that I say I hope to be, a fierce truth teller, but also gentle in the ways that I do that.
Mm.
And that's kind of felt like who I am at the core of myself. That those words feel like home to me. Um, and yeah, and I am an Enneagram 4. So all of those things come with constant questions, right? And introspection.
And you could definitely see it in your writing. I just every time I read one of your books, I'm like, yep, this person's an Enneagram 4. Just the way you word things, it's so Enneagram 4 like to me.
Isn't that funny? How you like can recognize that in other people?
Well, it takes an Enneagram 4 to know an Enneagram
That's
4. And
true. That is very
unfortunately,
true.
being an Enneagram 4 myself, I can just spot those other Enneagram 4s out pretty quickly.
It's so funny.
Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about the new book called Living Resistance. And the subtitle is an Indigenous Vision for Seeking Wholeness Every Day. I feel like every time I chat with you, I'm like, this is the best book Kaitlin Curtice has ever written. And I think this is true again. I think it's the best book that you've ever written. It's
Thank
incredible.
you.
So let's chat a little bit more about it. Again, this is your, I think, third
Yeah,
or fourth published book
my
now.
third.
Um, and I'm sure you learn something new about yourself every time that you write a book. But was there anything
Hmm.
in particular that you learned about yourself while you wrote this book versus maybe some of those other books?
Um, this was such an interesting season of writing because it was during COVID that I wrote it. So with
Mm,
my second book, Native released right as COVID hit. So that excitement of the release of Native, my second book, was kind of shadowed by the horror of COVID. And
mm,
then I knew that I needed to move on to the next book. And I already had a lot of this book kind of in my heart and mind and was ready to move forward with it. And so then I ended up writing this book throughout this COVID time we've been living in. So at times that felt, really difficult, the brain fog and trying to kind of sift through any sort of meaning making in the world right now that
mm,
feels so terrible sometimes. So a lot of it was the stress of that. But then this book really, anchored me to hope, I think. I read so many books to write this book because I wanted to include a variety of voices. I always tell people that if you read my books, I hope that you don't stop with my book that you just read, but that you read all the books I've quoted within my book. It's
mm,
meant to be a bulletin board, sort of, where you can go and grab a different book, that you can be inspired by the same people that inspire me. And I think that I learned about myself how much I love, uh, interfaith work or solidarity work, or just learning from these deep wisdom wells of other writers. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, when I read another, I mean, that who we are as writers is we're also readers. So when I read another book that inspires me, it just makes me more excited about my own writing. And my second book, Native, was so traumatic to write because it was kind of my story. It was a memoir of
Mm-hmm.
my experiences within American Christianity as an Indigenous young woman. And so this book was kind of like the what's next. And it was really good medicine for me to write it, to be very careful with it, to try to do well by the audience that I knew was going to read it. And I think that I'm really proud of it. And that it just, more deeply embedded the truth of who I am and the kind of voice I want to have in the world, that I will try as hard as I can to be inclusive, that I will try as hard as I can to speak the truth and do it in the
Mm-hmm.
way that fits me. And I'll fail, we always will still fail at things, but it was really exciting to try to do that with this book. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it set a tone for the rest of my work, I think, in a way.
There's something about maybe it's this book. Maybe I just haven't read your other books as well, or maybe I'm just like forgetting bits and pieces of them. But there's something about this book where, and you mentioned it earlier, where you're like, there's a fierceness to yourself that I
Mm-hmm.
love, and I think it's great, and that really comes out in this book a lot. And also knowing your personality, like I think there's kind of this hesitation to like, I want to be able to speak the truth, and it's important to speak the truth, and also like I don't want to ruffle feathers. Like I have that personality too, where
Mm-hmm.
like I'm fine, like I'm glad to like say something ridiculous and stupid, or even say something that I really truly believe in, like something really true, that might actually ruffle some feathers. And also I don't like to engage the conflict that comes up from that, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm fine with being like, oh, I'm a socialist, but I like if I and I'm fine with telling like someone like my parents who are very conservative that, but also the thing I don't like is the conflict that could come up in that truth telling, right?
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah.
really hesitate the truth telling. It's the conflict that comes for the truth telling. And I don't know, like maybe as an Enneagram 4 too, like you experienced that as well. But it's interesting because you still don't shy away from the truth telling, even though that conflict could come up from it.
Yes, and it does come up from it, and I think I feel some of that in my speaking events and some of those kind of energy, or through emails and things that we get. But I think that's why I always try to ground things back to like embodiment and storytelling and these kind of very basic things that draw us together as humans. It doesn't always work, but I would rather sort of come. It's like come in like a side door that people don't
Mm,
expect it, and then when you speak the truth, they're already so excited about the story that they're like, oh, and there's some truth, and I didn't know I was going to get hit with that, and they're
hmm
already just there, they're already there hanging out and taking part. That's kind of just how I do things, which is why I also like insert poetry into my books, because I want people to just pause a second and like take a breath, because I know it's hard. I know that hearing the truth about these things is difficult for people.
mm,
I and there's going to be grief involved. Like I have empathy for other humans who have to deal with these things and try to unlearn some of, I mean, it's hard. It's all really hard. So we have to be able to hold each other in it, and without shying away from the truth.
absolutely.
It's difficult.
All right. So you just mentioned before, just mentioned about what you learned about yourself, but was there anything about maybe it was indigeneity that you learned or something like that came up in the research of the book? I would imagine that to a certain degree you're doing a certain level of research when you're writing a book like this. Was there something that came up in that research where you're like, I didn't know that before. That's really interesting. Like that should be included in the book. So anything like that that came up that you're like, that's a nice little nugget to put in.
I think yes, there were lots of nuggets, and I think that what something I wanted to do with this book was expose people to worldwide indigeneity
Mm,
in its many forms, because Native was clearly about my journey as a Potawatomi woman, and it was clearly about America. And this book, obviously, I live in the US, so it's centered on that, but I wanted to include examples of resistance from around the world, or, examples of Indigenous peoples throughout history who have been fighting, so talking about like Indigenous farming practices in India and the
Mm.
Indian farming protests, like, I don't know, just trying to ground people in the fact that there is worldwide Indigenous wisdom.
Hmm.
I have been learning a lot about that. And I think that even for Indigenous people, we can still be siloed sometimes. And there's so much that we need to learn from one another across the globe and throughout history. That there are Indigenous people fighting for the land and the waters and just their livelihood every single day against governments and corporations. Like, this is not new, and colonization is ongoing.
Hmm.
And so especially the Indian farming protests was one that really felt important for me to share, that they're literally trying to save their seeds, to save
Hmm.
their foods, their crops from companies like Monsanto and so much of these, agriculture systems that are not there to protect Indigenous peoples or the land. And
Hmm.
so I thought that was a really beautiful example. That was just one little thing that I wanted to make sure to include.
I just finished reading Braiding Sweetgrass, which I think she's also
Yeah,
Potawatomi,
she
right?
is. Yeah.
So great. One of the things that came up in that book that I just thought was such an incredible key insight is, she talks about Homo sapiens. We've been around for less than 1 million years, like several hundred thousands of years. But a species like a tree been around for quite a lot longer. And so trees
Yeah.
have much more of a wisdom of all the things that nature throws at it. And
Yep.
so but to like think that even species outside of humans have a certain level of wisdom, and that
Hmm.
we can learn from them
Yep.
and their wisdom is something that I think is just so powerful. And
Yeah.
I think that like that indigenous piece of wisdom that she had was a key insight for me as I read her book. And so I'm just really excited for us to chat through more about kind of the indigenous wisdom that you pull out in this book. I just think it's really, really incredible. Um, One of those pieces is obviously the title of the book is called Living Resistance. And so the book is about resistance. Can you talk
Yeah.
about when you talk about resistance in this book, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really like to take, terms or ideas that have become popular or have become really important and kind of tease them out or stretch them a little. And to me, this idea of resistance was one of those words. Obviously, there's the, scientific definitions, but the idea of pushing against something, right,
Mm,
is what I'm looking at. And so I take resistance to sort of mean the ways that we use our everyday life to push against what I'm calling the status quo of colonization, of white supremacy. So, whatever that toxic status quo is, how are we using our lives, our personal lives, and our collective lives to push against, to resist that status quo? And then I also make an important note that resistance isn't always just what we're pushing against, but when we push against something, we're choosing something on the other side of it. We're choosing
mm,
something else. So, when we resist, what are we choosing? What kind of world are we wanting to create when we resist these forces or these systems? And I
mm,
think that I really enjoyed diving into what that means. And of course, I talk about it through these lenses of care for ourselves and each other and Mother Earth. I think those
mhm.
three lenses are sort of what the book came to be about, resisting through these ways.
Hmm. Yeah, so you structure the book in these different realms, the personal realm
Yeah.
being the first one. So I want to talk about that one first. I like that you begin there because it reminds me of something I've heard in abolitionist circles, which I don't know how much in the abolitionist world you are or not, but in the abolitionist circles, there's this phrase that I've heard that's something along the lines of abolition starts at home.
Hmm.
So we can talk about abolishing the police or abolishing prisons, but what good is that if we still live a carceral life at
Mm.
home, right?
Mhm.
So abolition starts at home. How you interact in your personal relationships is how you're
Yeah.
going to interact when it comes to these bigger systems. So I like that you
Yeah.
begin with the personal realm. Can you talk a little bit more about why you begin a book about resistance with the personal realm?
Yeah. Yeah, because it is based on that idea of, you know, to care for others, we have to care for ourselves. And we hear these things a lot, and I think we probably hear it so much that it starts to sound like it's not true, or that it's an empty phrase, you know? But it really is true. I mean, if we don't even know how to love ourselves, if we haven't practiced presence or embodiment, you know, I have been, and I shared in the book, I've been and still am on a journey of embodiment and of care for myself. And it makes it really difficult to do our work well in the world if we don't have some amount of care for ourselves, you
Mm,
know? And so I write about deconstruction, of course. I write about the difference between self-love and self-care and what radical self-love is in this context. I write about loving our child selves well. I write about my struggles with anxiety. There's a lot that goes into loving ourselves, and I don't know that we talk about it enough. I already know our systems aren't made for us to love ourselves well. You know, our
mm.
systems are not made for that. So how do we find ways to make space for that and to support each other in that as we do this work? I think that that's a really important question to ask. And so I definitely wanted to start the book with us focusing on ourselves a bit, not to stop there though, to continue. You take care of yourself so that you can lean into community, or you lean into the work you do, but you do it better whenever you are full, whenever you are
Hmm.
loved and cared for.
What's been a practice for you that has helped you in that self love, in that helping you feel full so that then you can also care for others? What's been a practice that's been really important for you? I would imagine folks that are listening are like, this all sounds really great, Caitlin, but also like, I would like to do that work too, not just hear about it. So, yeah, what's
Yeah.
been a practice that's been helpful for you that maybe you'd recommend to others to do?
Um, a few things. So, finding sort of a grounding routine anywhere that you can. So mine is in the mornings because that's space that I have to do that. I, take my kids to school, and then by myself or with my partner, we have a slow morning of having coffee together, and I read for a little bit before I dive into my work,
Mm,
because that helps me stay grounded to do the work well, to not burn out too quickly in my day. That's one thing. And then for me, movement. So getting out of my head and into my body, because I'm a writer. Like I live in my head, and I'm an Enneagram 4. So I live in my head all day, every day, you know? And so it is really, really important to practice movement and breathing. Like I just think we forget to breathe sometimes, and our systems can kind of go into fight or flight mode without us realizing it. So even just to walk outside, even just stepping away from a screen and refocusing on my body has been incredibly important for me.
I love that. Yeah, I just went on a hike yesterday listening to an audiobook, and it was a brisk walk, but I woke up this morning and I'm like, I'm a little sore, which I must be at that age now where walking makes me sore, which doesn't feel particularly but there's a nice thing about aging, I guess, but also like that's
Yeah.
one of the things I'm like, really at one point walking would not make me sore.
It was brisk though, so that's what counts.
That's right. That's right. So in the chapter on the personal realm, so that first kind of section of the book,
Yeah.
you talk about embodiment as resistance. And you've
Hmm.
already mentioned embodiment a couple times here. I'm sure my listeners are already very annoyed with me about talking about embodiment, probably every episode ever since I've written my thesis. But I wrote my thesis recently about like an embodied theology,
Mm.
essentially. So what does embodied resistance look like to you?
Um, what I have realized, embodiment, this idea, first of all, I'm certainly not an expert on embodiment. There are literal experts on embodiment. You should go read their books. But like Dr. Hillary McBride, read
Hmm.
Hillary's book. But my body, I have started listening to my body in recent years, really, because I spent so many years of my childhood and adolescence being dissociated from my body. So a lot of trauma, a lot of church trauma. There were just a lot of things in my body. I had pain, I had things that were happening, and I didn't have words for them, and I didn't know it was trauma kind of showing itself to me. There were a
Mhm.
lot of ways that my anxiety and my stress levels were so high, and I didn't have answers because I didn't recognize what was happening in my body. So embodiment has been really, really important for me. And it'll be a lifelong journey. I think I want to point that out to everyone, that resistance, embodiment, care, solidarity, all these big words, these big ideas are lifelong practices. It's a lifelong journey of being human that brings us to this. And um, I will say that I don't know. I mean, embodiment has to be through action. Like
Mm.
embodiment has to be on purpose. Like we have to take the time to get out of this area and drop into our bodies, into our hearts, to check in and see how we're doing. And that's really difficult to do when we live in a society that is so heady, I guess, and there is so much to think about and process and over process. So getting back into our bodies is really important. And I also recognize that looks different for everyone. Um, Obviously, all bodies are different and all minds
Mhm.
are different. And so we have to ask how that works best for us and what that might mean. One other thing that has meant a lot to me is rock climbing. Which my our whole family started doing together last year. So we joined a local gym here in Philly, and we go climbing as a family. And it's one of the best ways for me to get out of my head and into my body lately.
Mhm.
And I've really, either outside or at the gym, I've really loved that, and that's meant a lot to me. And I know it's helping on my resistance journey as well.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things I bring up in my thesis is the mind-body dualism that we see so ingrained in our society, and that in order to I think it's part of decolonization, but I do think that at the end of the day, if we're going to see the kind of liberation that we want to see in the world, we actually have to really get rid of this mind body dualism. And
Yes.
so becoming embodied really is an act of resistance to the what I would argue is a sort of colonizing nature
Yes.
of mind body dualism. And so
Absolutely.
whether it's rock climbing, whether it's taking a hike, whatever your body needs to do and wants to do and is able to do.
Right.
But all of those things that your body can do, wants to do, and needs to do, all of those things I think are just one small piece towards a resistance to this colonizing nature of mind body
Yes.
dualism.
Yeah, and for those of us who grew up in Christian spaces, I grew up Southern Baptist, so well, women's bodies were, all bodies were bad slash didn't matter because we'll go to heaven eventually. But then on top of that, being a young woman,
Hmm.
we had this awful power to tempt everyone around us and cause lust all over the place. So our bodies were like constantly just, we are judging ourselves for everything. And it was so much, and it cast this just shame over our bodies. And why would I have a relationship with this thing if it's bad, and I'm told it's
Mm.
bad, and I'm told it's bad all of my
Hmm.
childhood, and that it can't be trusted, and that like at some point there's so much unlearning and decolonizing we have to do to
Hmm.
get to healing.
One of the things that I found is that it's interesting. I wrote this thesis about embodiment, and you've written this chapter about embodiment because it doesn't come naturally for me. I don't know
Hmm.
about for you, but it doesn't necessarily come naturally for me, which is part of the reason why I wanted to write about it, because it was going to force me into
Yes.
getting into that space more often. But one of the reasons is I met with this Enneagram coach a number of years ago now, and she she like did the little enneagram diagram where it's the circle and then you get like the numbers around it and everything, and she points out, she's like, where do you see the 4 in relation to this circle? I'm like, well, it's at the bottom. And she was like, where, and there's like the different triads of the mind triad, the heart triad, and the body triad. She's like, where do you see the body triad? And I'm like, oh, it's at the very top. She's like, do you see the 4 as at the very bottom, and the mind or the body triad is at the very top? Like, that part is not going to be the most natural thing for you.
Yeah.
So whenever, and so she was like, I want you to start describing like some of the most transformative experiences in your life. And so I start telling her some of the things. She's like, do you see a common thread between all these things? I'm like, oh, they're all like very embodied. They're all like very embodied experiences, or like at least the way I describe them are very embodied.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, there might be a reason for that because it's not the most natural thing for you. But when you do have these embodied
Yeah.
experiences, it's going to be transformative because
Yes.
it's the point between a four and that body triad is so far from each other. So anyway, I don't know if that's a similar
I
experience for
love
yourself
that.
as a four, but anyway, I
Yeah.
found that very interesting.
Yeah, it is. That's actually really interesting, and it is true. I'm the same way. That's so interesting. I'm gonna think about that more. Yeah, that's
Well,
fascinating.
let's move on to the communal realm. So we've talked about the personal realm. Let's move on to the communal realm. Uh, I'll just say we can't do resistance alone, right? So I love that you bring up kinship with the non-human world. I
Yeah.
think that part in particular, really, in that communal realm section, really stood out to me. Can you talk more about kinship with the non-human world and why it's necessary for resistance?
Yes. My books are very cyclical and repetitive, and I do that on purpose. It's kind of like, if I point out these things enough, maybe we'll get it by the end,
Yeah.
and it's just, I'm okay with that, kind of meeting these same moments in different ways throughout different chapters. And so connecting to Mother Earth or the creatures around us, all of those things. Sorry, my dog just walked in.
I mean, I feel like this is a
I
very,
know.
I mean,
Oh,
this
shoot.
is a
This
perfect
is
time. We're talking about
Jupiter.
the non-human world.
This is Jupiter. My
Let's have your dog join.
Weimaraner. Well, he won't leave me alone, so we're here now.
I love it.
um anyway, I had to keep touching on this aspect. Like, our community is not just other people, it's also, the creatures around us, it's the wisdom of trees, the wisdom of water, the wisdom of Mother Earth, the wisdom of the land. That's all our community. Like, we can't get away
Mm,
from that. And so Indigenous people throughout history all over the world have been fighting for this relationship and have been modeling this relationship for so long. And I think that it's just really important to ask why we need these relationships. And so, yeah, one of my favorite chapters that I wrote in the book was, caring for the land as resistance, and pointing out why that's important and why we need it. And we
mm.
do. Our community isn't just the other people in our lives, and anyone who has pets or has, a garden or goes on walks and communes with nature or other creatures, knows that. And so, can we step back and just pay attention to that as we
Mm.
go?
Are there any practices that you've done that help you connect with the non-human world where it's you're able to develop a deeper relationship than, oh, that's a really pretty flower? Because I think that's like like that. A lot of times you hear like you people will go like on a retreat or something, and the reason why they go on a retreat is because they want to get into the beautiful outdoors or whatever, and like that's great and fine, but also like these are like to get into a retreat or something that's a little disconnected from or quite a ways from a large city. Part of that reason, I think, is to actually develop deeper relationships with other species.
Hmm.
Are there any sort of practices that help you engage in that kind of deeper relationship making with non-human the non-human world?
Yeah, I think there have been a few things throughout the years. Obviously, going on walks, and I think it's good to go on walks where you don't take your phone and you don't listen to anything, but you listen to
Mm,
the world around you, and you just ask questions of the relationship. Something that I encourage people to do is to start a like letters to Mother Earth journal, where you actually start writing letters to
mm,
her as a being, and you ask what this relationship means and what it's meant to you and how it can be better. I think that that's a really beautiful and difficult thing for people to do. Um, and then I do garden, and it's funny because we've lived in Philadelphia now for 2 years, so and in cities, and so I usually do container gardening, and um, and it's a challenge, and it's been so beautiful to start my own seeds inside and see what grows. That relationship to plants and growing your own seeds is so beautiful because it's so reciprocal. They're
Mm.
giving you life and you are trying to take care of them and listen to them. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just so beautiful to me.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've heard, I think it was like maybe a couple years ago now, but I heard somebody talk about they had a number of trees in their backyard and they named every tree.
Mm.
And just in the way that you would interact with your dog. What's your dog's name, by the way?
Jupiter.
Jupiter. Just like you name Jupiter, and that by naming Jupiter, you then have a deeper level of a relationship than if
Yeah.
you than you trying to have a relationship with something that is not named.
Yeah.
By naming a tree in her backyard, she was able to have a deeper relationship with that tree. And so I think just even something as simple as naming a non-human species that you maybe interact with regularly, like a tree in your backyard, by naming it, I think that just
Yeah.
adds to that level of intensity around a deeper relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're just, again, some of us who grew up in Christian spaces, we were taught that narrative of domination, which is not a narrative of relationship.
Mm.
And so, so
I think Jupiter is wanting to be a lapdog.
listen, oh, you have no idea. Weimaraners think they're tiny. I have 2 giant containers in front of my office door to keep him out, and he's still
Just
push
walks right over it.
through them. So, yeah, we are taught we're just taught domination. We're taught humans are the most powerful. We know we know the most. We're the
Right.
best. Why would we humble ourselves and listen to any other creature besides ourselves? Like, why would we do that? And there's just so much unlearning to do,
Mm-hmm.
to be in these relationships.
Yeah, it just goes back to the braiding sweetgrass point of, yeah, we've
Yep.
got these large brains, we've got these great central nervous systems that are quite different than a lot of other species, but also trees have been around for a lot longer and probably have more wisdom in that regard because of
Yeah,
it.
and their roots talk to each other, and there's
Right,
just so much we have no idea.
right, totally. We also can't do resistance without those who came before us, and so you kind of you've got the ancestral realm that
Hmm.
you talk about. Can you talk about why that realm is so important to resistance? And I think about someone like myself who grew up very much in a white world and in a world of white supremacy, where besides like maybe my grandparents, I was not connected really whatsoever with my ancestral realm, other than maybe knowing some history, but
Yeah.
certainly did not have like any practices, any way of engaging the ancestral realm where they have wisdom to offer me or something like that. Did not grow up in a world like that. So can you
Right.
talk about why that ancestral realm is so important when it comes to resistance?
Yeah, the ancestral realm is complex because first it seems kind of vague and difficult. It's not super tangible for some people, and I know they will
Mm.
struggle with that. Then the other thing is that in a lot of ways we do have this obsession with ancestry and DNA right now, and these kinds
Hmm.
of things. So I knew it would be a difficult thing to write on, and trying to frame it in a way that's helpful for everybody, no matter who you are. And I think that the best way for me to do that is to just remind us of this idea of the 7 generations, that there were 7 generations before us who prepared us for the life we live today,
Mm.
and there are 7 generations who will come after us, and the life that we live today is going to give them or not give them the tools that they need to live a good life. And
Mm.
so we kind of live in that liminal space between those who came before and those who come after. And I think that part of our resistance is recognizing that our daily work is somehow affecting those who came before and those who will come after while it's changing us. And I think that's just a really beautiful kind of communal way of seeing things, because some of us maybe have ancestors who were totally shitty, and we have to deal with that. Like, we
Hmm.
can't ignore it. We know it happened. Maybe we don't know how to fix it. Well, how can we make our lives about the work of resistance in a way that counters those narratives or counters what happened? Like, how can we can't change the past, but we can pay attention, and we can speak into some of that and ask what comes next and pay attention to that as well.
Yeah, how do you think through that for the part of our ancestry that is kind of shitty? Like, you know, like growing up in that white world and also
Yeah,
having a lot of white ancestry, there's parts of it where I'm like, they're actually part of the reason why we've gotten ourselves into this mess,
for
or like
sure.
why we're in this mess, right?
For sure.
Like, how do I have that connection with that ancestral realm, knowing that a large majority of it for me is going to be pretty shitty?
Yes.
So I don't know like what your relationship. Obviously, you've got your indigenous relationship
Mhm.
or your indigenous ancestry,
Mhm.
but like I'm just like, what would you offer or what would you recommend to people who do have ancestry that is actually largely shitty, and how should they? What would you recommend how they should relate to that kind of
Yeah.
ancestry?
I mean, I think that part of the process is being okay with the grief and the
Mm,
anger maybe that comes with that. Like many things when um when we fall into like the mode of shame, it kind of shuts everything down and we can't get the work done. Like we can't lean into the work of resistance. So stepping into the truth of who those people were and the ways that they did or didn't do what was right or resist the status quos of their time, we can be honest about that without shaming ourselves so that we can
mm,
stay active in doing the work that needs to be done. Does that make
mm-hmm,
sense? Like
mm-hmm,
being honest about it. Like
mm-hmm,
I know I have ancestors who were shitty and I have to deal with that on both sides of my family. I have to deal with what that means. And I write about some of that, this experience during a meditation of seeing some of my ancestors and them inviting me into this work felt to me like they were saying, you know, we've gotten it really wrong and we've also done okay, but we've also done it really wrong. And we
mm-hmm,
need you to be part of this. And
mm-hmm,
again, I know that sounds really abstract for a lot of people. It's not like you need to name each of every ancestor you've ever had and know exactly what they did or didn't do. Um, but there's work to be done today. And we have to trust that even the grief, the unpacking of that, challenging these status quos, that all of that has to also be ancestral work. I mean,
mm-hmm.
I want to believe that. I want to believe that the beautiful work of resistance we do will affect those who came before and those who come after.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to become ancestors. And so
Exactly.
what's the world that we want to leave with, that the futures that come after us are like, yep, I'm
Yep.
proud of what my ancestors did because they undid some of this other shit that their
Yeah.
ancestors did.
Yeah.
And so, to leave the world a better place so that those who come after us are able to say, you know what, these are ancestors who are worth connecting with.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Um, you finish up the book by talking about the integral realm, or am I? I always feel like I'm saying that word wrong.
Integral or integral?
Integral,
I don't know. Either
integral,
one. I
integral.
like integral better. So
But yeah, you finish up the book talking about the integral realm. Can you talk more about what you mean by the integral realm? I was a little confused by that, so I'm just curious what you mean by the integral realm and why is it
yeah.
necessary for resistance?
So that last realm, the integral realm, is this. It's the season of autumn. It's your shkode or your fire, and so this
Mm,
is like integral as in integrate, right? We're integrating everything. We're integrating the
mm,
work that we've done in all these other realms. Not that they're supposed to be done like in a linear way. We're living in all the realms all the time.
mm,
Is the importance of that? How are we taking these lessons that we're learning, these embodiments we're practicing? How are we taking that resistance and connecting it back to our hearts, back to our souls, back to who we are? And that's where I talk about like prayer and dreaming and how
mm,
resistance is lifelong. So those are kind of like it for me in my life. Um, some of those things just hit at the core of who I am. Like they're the things I hold at the center of me. These
mm,
questions of what prayer is, these questions of what dreaming might be. Um, and so I wanted to try to give language to that. What is that? the core of who we are. And since autumn is the time of harvest, it's like we're gathering in, right? We're gathering in all of these things that we've been trying to practice, and it's like we're letting them seep deeper into our bodies and into our spirits so that we can then start all over again, basically. And we just keep continuing the cycles of resistance. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that you're connecting all of these, that they're not some disconnect.
Yeah.
The previous three realms aren't disconnected from one another,
Right.
but that their integration of it
Yeah.
is what's key, and I think that's when we're really going to start to see the resistance that is necessary in the world. But I also love the point that you bring out that this is going to be lifelong. We're not
Yes.
going to be able to flip a switch one day and say, you know what, resistance has now happened. That this
Yes.
is really a practice. The practice, the ongoingness of resistance is what is key to all of this, and understanding that way. I think the understanding of it that way, first off, gives us the hope that at some point it will happen, but we don't have this like false hope that at someday it's going to happen in our lifetime or something. We don't have to have
That's
that
true.
false hope. And also, I think the fact that it's this ongoingness helps people realize they don't have to be perfect at this.
Yes.
There's going to be days where we're
Yes.
going to slip up in this resistance. There's going to be days where we're going to make the mistake. And yet, because it's lifelong, means that you can repent of that, or you can
Yes.
apologize for that and go on to do
Keep
better
going.
work of
Exactly.
resistance later on. So it frees us up in that way. Frees us up from the false hope that it will happen immediately, like tomorrow. And it frees us up from feeling like we have to be perfect at this.
Yes, exactly. And that's why I wanted to write about it and end the book with that, because we are also in a society where we want to just put band-aids on things. Like we just want to fix. Of course we do. Like it's good to want to fix problems. But if we have generations of, colonialism and white supremacy and all these other problems that have created the status quo we live in, reading 2 books is not going to fix it. But
Right.
please read the books though,
Right.
But like social media and some of our resistance circles have made people think that they have to heal it all and they have to fix themselves and do all of the work really quickly. And all that does is lead us into deeper burnout and shame sometimes because people don't get the result they think that they should have gotten. And so what you're saying is exactly right. Our, the kids and grandkids, the future generations may start to see some of the fruit of what we're doing, but we may not see it. And we have to be okay with that. Yeah. And we have to feel the freedom of that.
Well, it kind of goes back to the 7 generations. It may take 7 generations.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
It's not that things will be perfect by 7 generations. It's just that it actually might take that many generations to start to undo just even a little bit of this.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, as much as weird. I don't know why I got that. Just as much as something like colonialism, right, happens within the last several hundred years, right? And it took like several hundred years of colonialism to come to its head, and we still see that happen all the time. It also is going to take way longer probably to undo some of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
As quick as colonialism absolutely screwed up a lot of the world, it also is going to take even probably longer just
Well,
to
yeah,
heal.
because it's ongoing. I mean, it's, so it's kind of hard to stop a thing that's still rolling, like it's still happening. So, yeah, we have to
Yes.
be aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, a forest fire can burn down a forest within, moments.
Yeah.
And it's going to take probably hundreds of years for that forest to grow back as it was before the fire.
Yeah.
Right? Just sort of like that. It just takes a long time. But it's the work that's necessary. The tagline of my podcast is exploring, inspiring, and liberating theologies. How do you hope the readers of Living Resistance are inspired and liberated by the book?
My hope for my books, but especially this one, was that people could be challenged, but also find my words to be a safe place to just process these things. Especially for people from marginalized or oppressed identities, no matter what that is. I want my words to be, a balm or a safe place for them, because I meet a lot of people who are struggling with these same things, from different identities and struggling with how we do this work well and take care of ourselves well. And so that's really important to me. I hope it reminds people that the work that we do on the personal level, the micro, is really important, and the work that we do on the macro level is also really important, and everything in between. That we need to be part of changing systems, but we can also be part of just changing the way we think, and that spreads to our families and our friends and our communities, and that's also how we change things. So
Hmm.
I hope people feel that in this book.
Absolutely. Last question, Kaitlin. How can listeners get connected to you and your work?
I think the best way is Instagram is where I'm at most as far as social media, and then the Liminality Journal is my Substack, and
Mm,
that's where you'll find more information on what's happening, and speaking events and traveling, and then just essays and poetry. It's a really fun community of people. So I think those two are some of the best places to find me.
lovely. And where would you recommend people to get the book?
Um, well, of course, support your local bookshops as best you can. And if you're not able to do that, then get it anywhere. But you can find a bunch of links on my website, KaitlinCurtice.com. There's a lot of different possibilities for ways you can order it.
Lovely, lovely. Well, Kaitlin, thank you so much for chatting more about the book. Again,
Thank you.
I feel like every book gets a little bit better with you.
Thank
It's
you.
so great. So thank you so much for writing it and chatting a little bit more about it.
Thank you.